There's a proverb that talks about the lazy person's path being covered with briars, which is to say thorn bushes. This is the lazy person's path. You can look at lazy in two ways, though. You hear on the surface the actions, a person being too lazy to act. But what else is being presented with the thorns? I would say fear. Fear of harm. This is what's being presented by the way being covered with thorns. The way could be covered with anything. It could be uncovered. It could be a pit. It could be water. It could be a cliff. But if you're lazy, it's a thorn bush. So what's wrapped up in laziness is fear, whether it be procrastination or just all out fear. Overall, this is what it's going to be. So the idea of the thorn bushes, that gives you the presentation of harm. So with the potential to be harmed being the path itself, it causes one to be reluctant to even travel it. You notice how it says that their way is covered with briars and thorn bushes. It doesn't say that is a certain way in particular that they choose that becomes a thorn bush. Doesn't say a particular kind of path is covered with thorns, but it says the lazy person's path. So this means if one is lazy, whichever way they choose is going to look harmful. Too harmful to either address, or if that path be taken on, it's going to be drudgingly or with pain. You got to imagine, if your path is covered with thorns, already you going in there with caution, you tipping. Because you don't want to make one wrong step. And I guess there's this allusion to the idea of being barefoot while this goes on. But let's just say, you know, because that's what it would sound like if we're talking about the way, we're talking about traveling. So that goes mentioned without being mentioned, you know what I mean? That it's barefoot. Take off your sandals, Moses, you're on holy ground type of thing. The path being covered with thorn bushes, it could still apply if somebody wanted to just say, well, what if I got on boots? It's still toe boots. Well, thorn bushes don't just grow at the lower level. Thorn bushes will stretch out on you. It'll be a whole briar patch. Bushes that you have to wade through. You'll be swimming through those things. They'll be waist high. Briar patch. Might be tall as your whole body. It might be thorns wrapped around a tree. It might be an entanglement of overgrowth. You might be subjected to some good old-fashioned overgrowth. Covered with thorns. Thorn bushes. So you already don't want to be touched by any aspect of the path, which is parallel to not wanting to receive any advice or learn anything regarding the obtaining of one's desire. So you can't tell them nothing. On the surface, we're like, well, that person is just rude, right? It goes deeper than that. Sometimes it's easier, it's perceived to be easier by not taking somebody else's advice, because you know your own thoughts already. You just want to go with that. It takes effort to learn something else, to expand. It takes effort. And so with that effort, the thorn bush effect comes into play. Because if you're afraid of every part of the path, both high and low, right? Let's assume you got boots on your feet when you're on your path, metaphorical path. You still got to be worrying about bobbing and weaving through any vines that might be there. You still got to worry about all of that. And eventually, understanding also, going in that same book, the idea of this path and what they're calling also the race that is to be run is an endurance race. So you figure if a person doesn't know that this life is about endurance rather than speed, and if they're lazy, then they're going to think, you know what, I could just sprint through these thorns, just get it over with, just sprint through this real quick. But pay for the mistakes, the missteps for an entire lifetime because they thought like, hey, you know what, I could just sprint through the thorn bushes. I could just sprint through the thorns. I'll get through it quick. The race is not given to the swift. Well, I can outmuscle them if I just tear these apart and just suffer the gashes, just a couple of stitches, I'll be fine. The race is not given to the strong. This is endurance. Whoever endures to the end. So the path goes on and on. So essentially, if you don't want to be hurt anymore, you don't want any more bumps and bruises in life, you don't want any more lessons, then you'll probably choose not to move at all. And that's ultimately what laziness does. You have the demon, Belphegor, sending zodiacal demon triads at them to break their body down due to living sedentary, inert, lack of movement. You can see this play out in body. The person just doesn't move at all, hardly ever. Health symptoms will accrue. If the person is lazy mentally, health symptoms will accrue. I mean, it's really the same thing. But you still got to acknowledge those two different layers. Because a person could be super active in body and lazy in mind. The idea of just muscling their way through life. We don't need to think it through and worry about the details. We'll just push our way through it and worry about whatever later. But what it takes to correct the mistakes can cost you more of your life than you expected, which was probably set aside for you to achieve some kind of goal. But now you got to spend that time that you would have spent achieving your goal fixing a mistake. Thorns. So what does diligence do? Diligence, their path is not covered with thorns. Why? Because what if it starts off as thorn bushes for both parties? Let's assume that. Let's go with the idea of everything being fair. If they're both starting off with thorn bushes for a path, whether you're lazy or hardworking, then you got to be equipped with some stuff to walk with, like sickles, tomahawks, and you're not just moving your feet, you're moving your arms, you're waving them. So you're not just making the connections, meeting up with the people, getting your feet moving. You're not just putting your feet to the ground, but you're using your hands too. You're drafting up the letter, the cover letter. You're writing the business proposal. You're letting them know what the specs are. You're letting them know what the particulars are. You're showing them how it's monetizable. You're showing them exactly what it is you do. You're breaking it down. You're putting it in writing. You're acknowledging the agreement. You're coming to an agreement. This is the whacking away of the thorns, should you be hardworking and start with thorns anyway. The Proverbs do go on to say the way these thorns appear for a lazy person is really that their path starts off smooth, but then it gets overgrown with thorns and briars. So from lack of maintenance, from the dropping off of keeping the routine tight, causes that path to be harder. If a person wants to do something and they're not learning anything about it, that's going to be thorn bushes for them. That path started off clear, though, because they saw their goal. They saw what they wanted to be, what they wanted to do. But because they never took the time to start it, that path, now you got a thorn. One thorn might be you're no longer under the care of your parents. Now you have to work. So now you really don't have time to pursue whatever it was you had a dream for the same way, because now you have to work to survive. That's a thorn. Not all thorns are bad. Paul asked Christ to remove thorns 3 times, and Christ said, my grace is sufficient. So not all thorns are bad, but thorns are still thorns. Another thorn, you might just have a family and you might not even have time to go off into your dream also on top of work. And then you might have an organization that you're a part of, a club. So then that's more time. So altogether, just by not going for the goal when it's clearly defined, you could be allowing time for thorns to grow in your path. When the thorns grow in your path, you know the primary thing is not to just keep moving, but you got to do some waving too. You're going to have to chop ahead of you. You can't just walk into the thorns. You'll get tangled up. You got to swing ahead of yourself. What is this comparable to? The same thing I said before. Learning something before you just jump into it. Wave your sickle around. There might be some thorn bushes that got to be chopped. Do the hard work of trying to find out where the pitfalls are. The other extreme, of course, will be analysis paralysis. The fear of just trying. You be like, okay, I got enough steps. Okay, can I try step 1? Yeah, you could try step 1 once you got step 1. You don't have to know all 100 steps before you try step 1. If you know step 1, you can do step 1. If you do it like you're trying to know all the steps before trying the steps, instead of 100 steps, you got 100 thorns. Deal with one thorn at a time, one section of thorny overgrowth at a time, one issue at a time, one challenge at a time, one potential opportunity at a time. Super T Sigma, Sigma programming. Stay illuminated. Peace.